So Gerald, can you pose that question once more, please?
Yeah, I would ask Professor Leisyte to describe a little bit the state of the economy in Germany and Europe after the pandemic. Have we gone through it more or less well? And are we recovering? What are the challenges now for the economy and its international trade relations?
Well, I would first of all thank you for the invitation very much. And of course, I have to say I am a professor of higher education management, so I cannot account for financial trends and detailed trends, what is happening. I can be more of an observer of what is happening in Germany during and after the pandemic. What we've seen, of course, the really disrupting of global supply chains and huge delays in different sectors. Of course, talking about Germany, the automotive sector is extremely important. When it comes, however, what we could see, there was a slow kind of recovery, and there was a lot of federal funding pumped into the system to really ensure that the employment, especially the middle, small and medium enterprises, are kind of bridging that period of during the coronavirus when there were lockdowns, really strict lockdowns in Germany. When thinking about the key challenges, I would say, when I think especially comparatively compared to systems where I've been working and living in the Netherlands and the US, Scandinavia, and my home country, Lithuania, the huge challenge, economic, but also social and also for higher education, is digitalization and really very, very slow pace, despite the big promises and investments from the federal, state, and also the land governments into the digitalization. Still, it's a really, really slow progress, and that with the e-automobile industry, e-governments, e-everything. This is one of the key challenges that I think will remain in Germany. So as an introductory aspect, I would stop there.
Professor Floss, your point of view from the American side.
Well, I would agree that there are real issues in the supply chains that are causing disruptions all across the United States. But probably even more important than that are two things. One is that we have two different borders with our two major trading partners, Canada and then Mexico and South America. Because of the issues, particularly with hurricanes and other things in South America, there's a large immigration issue on our southern border. What that's done is it's meant that because the United States doesn't want to look like they're showing favoritism, it's also closed the entire Canadian border. And so for cities like Buffalo, Detroit, Seattle, with large transportation and cross-border trade, that's shut down a lot, which has slowed down our economy much more than you would have expected. To give you an example, where I am in Buffalo, half of the auto plant is in Canada, the other half is in Buffalo, but we can't go really back and forth to make sure that everything's working as smoothly as it should be. So that's a fundamental issue. But the other thing that's probably more important, and you've probably seen in Europe on the news, is this anti-vaccination movement, particularly in southern states. Because what that's done is really disrupted trade between different regions of the country, because whole groups of companies in southern states are having to shut down because of the pandemic. For example, last week, Duke University had to go completely online because they didn't require masks or vaccines. They lasted about a week. And now, because of the number of positive cases, are now all online. So we're having disruptions not only from a trade perspective, but also from this political perspective that I don't think you're seeing quite as bad an effect in Europe.
Can you add maybe still one point on the lockdown in the Congress, which might happen tomorrow night?
This is something that happens, every year around this time. Somehow we always think that the United States is going to default, and always at the last second, sometimes after the last second, Congress is known for stopping the clock. So at the end of October, it will stay October 31st for a couple of days until they can actually get this fixed. I can't believe that, other than for political points, that they're going to actually not pass something. So while it's great theater and it does well on television, I suspect that we will look back in 2 or 3 weeks and realize that that's passed. Much more important, I think, is the question of whether or not our infrastructure bill is going to get passed, and whether any of the social parts of that, childcare, healthcare issues that all of you in Europe already have that we don't have, whether or not the Democrats are going to be able to push any of that through.
Under the given situation, I wonder what can be done or has to be done immediately to push the economy forward again. Do you have any recipes or ideas?
Is that for me, or?
Both of you. Maybe you want to start. No, Professor Leisyte is going to add later.
Okay, thank you. I think actually the infrastructure bill is critically important to the United States. The transportation system in the United States, basically because of the great distances in the United States that you don't have in Europe, means that it's much more costly to build out our roads, our internet, our phone systems, our train systems. So we really are lagging behind you, mainly because of geographical reasons. So it's important to get started at this juncture. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in pushing places like New York City, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, where individuals were able to move out and work from home. I suspect that a large number of those people are going to be forced to move back in, but that's a disruption to our economy that's going to take place over the next year as people move back and forth and try to find out where they actually need to be. The real fear, I think, in our major cities, and it'd be interesting to hear what's happening in Europe, is that we're going to see commercial real estate prices drop dramatically. And that's going to cause a financial disruption in this country that we need to prepare for. We also have an overheated stock market at this point. So I could see sort of a 2008 scenario, maybe not as bad as 2008, but I see a lot of the ingredients for 2008 for a financial crisis and a real estate crisis happening again.
Same in Germany or in Europe?
When I'm thinking about Europe, I think, and especially now, if I'm thinking about Germany, to think about the future, I think the huge question is, what's the political situation and how the government will be actually looking like, and what will be the key parties, the coalition, how it will look like in order to see, is it going more the green route? Is it, going more towards more borrowing? I mean, borrowing has been really expanding heavily in the first 6 months of 2021 of the federal government in Germany. And that is the question, if that will continue. Partly, this would help, of course, to offset the possibly side effects through subsidies, and making sure that the businesses are kind of afloat, and things are kind of the vaccinations are working. And if they manage to persuade more population to vaccinate, that is another question, because the question is, will over the winter, will the businesses survive? From what I've seen in press, and also from some anecdotal evidence of interviewing some people in Netherlands and some in Germany, the SMEs, for example, they've been surviving through some savings, through some properties that they have, investments that they had, also through the subsidies and state support, especially in the German case. That was the case. Netherlands was more liberal in this respect. The question is, if there will be again lockdowns, if that will be necessitated, that could be really a big breaker for the German economy, because those savings are not there anymore, right? So if there is no support financially from the state coming along anymore, as it was previously, that would be really a game changer. Thinking about the real estate prices, again, I'm not an expert here, but there is a huge boom of all over the European countries. What I've seen, there's been really inflation of prices for real estate. And I can also see some of the trends, what you are mentioning in the US, that can be a big bubble kind of burst at some point for the real estate markets, especially given also the issues with supply chains that I mentioned earlier, and delays, huge delays in deliveries of certain construction materials and so on. So that would be a concern for me. Recipes, I really tried not to give recipes, talk about general trends, but really having this kind of social net and support, financial support, especially for SMEs, but also for some of the main industries, even the automotive industry, although it's really, if you look at macroeconomic indicators, they've been doing pretty well given the overall situation, especially with the state subsidies for mobility. There's been a huge boost for that industry at the moment. So I hope they will continue this support, and that would help to keep things afloat.
Yeah, I think we have very low interest rates as well in United States as in Europe, and that makes a run in the real estate market. Of course, if you have to pay even interest rates for your savings, as we have to do in Germany now soon, it's clear that everybody is looking for some concrete savings, buildings or something like that, or apartments to rent. But in this situation of not knowing where the economy is going to exactly, isn't it smart or wise to increase slowly the interest rates again, even with the risk of a certain kind of inflation? I don't know what the policy in America is. The Fed seems to go slowly up again. Isn't it true, Professor Floss?
Yeah, part of this is that the normal monetary policy in the United States has sort of been thrown to the side for this idea of quantitative easing. So the idea that the Federal Reserve has been buying up not only federal bonds, but other individual bonds, means that the standard way of trying to raise interest rates isn't going to work. So what they're trying to do right now is unspin the position they had after the Great Recession. They probably should have done it earlier. They haven't, and now they're trying to sort of slowly unwind this position that they have. And that makes it very hard to raise interest rates right now. It also means that the stock market is very overvalued because, as I think you've correctly said, if we're looking for a place to put our savings and banks are giving a 0 interest rate or even charging you money now in some cases in the United States to put your savings in the bank, not only are you losing inflation, but you're also not getting any return. You're paying to sort of keep your money in the bank. That's really having a hardship on those who are in fixed income, you know, the retired, the elderly, and those individuals. On the other end, that's also meant that a lot of individuals who have put their money into sort of housing to rent out housing has had a problem as well, because individuals don't, like some of the older individuals who might have been able to afford some of this housing don't have the savings anymore as they might have, and haven't had any interest in probably 10 years now, so that it makes it harder for those investments to stand as well. So I think we're at a mismatch in monetary policy, and the only way to get out of this is really fiscal policy. So it brings us back to, are we going to be investing in a way that'll raise interest rates in the economy and do some of the underpinnings that you have either in Germany or in the rest of Europe?
It's just a question, an idea. It's just a question, an idea. If we had all experienced disturbances in the delivery chains and in the cooperation, economic cooperation, isn't it time to open our borders more openly and try to avoid all kind of bureaucracy, tariff barriers, etc. Because what we have seen now here in Europe is the tragedy of Great Britain. After the Brexit, nothing works anymore. They don't even have petrol, gas at the stations. It's the supermarkets are half empty because it doesn't work anymore. So open the borders. Isn't it the challenge of the time? Professor Leisyte, you want to start?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think extremely relevant question. And one thing is opening borders and restrictions because of immigration. The other question is opening borders because of the corona and the pandemic. So there are, to me, they're interrelated, of course, but they are different. So the Brexit issue it was foreseeable that this is coming, right? With the policy, strict immigration policy and controls that the UK put themselves or fenced themselves against everyone around them. And that, in my personal view, from what I've seen in the mobility studies, is really not at all at the advantage of the economy, of the social policy to do that for the country. So this is kind of, that's the UK story, so to say. The other story is, of course, the restrictions for traveling because of the pandemic. And I think one has to admit that after nearly now, 2 years, right, of this experiences, nearly 2 years experiences, there's been some learning happening. So we've seen with the holiday travel recovering, and certain countries, and this traffic light system that is used in the EU, and the vaccination, the passports for traveling, the QR codes, and so on. So we've seen some instruments that have been working and have been effective to some extent. And the reactions also, what we can see in the governments also, that they've been learning. They've been learning that, okay, if you completely shut down, you really, really have a economic problem, and not to say political problem, or social problem for that matter. So there's been some learning and some more kind of easing of the travel because of the corona within the European context. However, when it comes to immigration, and I'm Lithuanian myself personally, so I've been observing closely what is happening in the Belarus and the borders with Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and shipping basically, or flying in refugees from some countries into Belarus and then pushing them into the European borders. There's been a huge crisis this summer for immigration. And again, this was a very pertinent issue to say, so what do we do, right? Do we open our borders and welcome, refugees for their need? Or do we recognize the political game here happening, of certain governments, playing the game and disturbing the border relationships and the neighboring relationships through using simply this mobility and refugee problems that are there. So I think it's a very complex issue, the mobility and exchanges, but personally, for the economy and for political reasons, opening and keeping those borders open as much as possible is only at their advantage. I think we've seen already the effects of closure. What does that mean? Sorry, it's been a bit long.
The same situation is in United States, in particular with the border to Mexico, you mentioned already before.
Right. The one difference is between our different states, we don't have any borders where anybody's being checked. In fact, during the early part of the pandemic, states were actually trying to stop people from certain states from coming into different states. So in New York, there was a ban on anybody from Florida because the pandemic was so bad in Florida at the time. I'm not so sure that it worked all that well. So we are able to travel within the continental United States, but there's still, I think, a fear there of where you're going to go and whether or not you're going to get sick, particularly because of the political issues of people, certain states being more vulnerable to the pandemic. And so those are issues. We also have an immigration issue, which is a little bit different because of the whole Afghanistan situation. There are refugees coming into the United States. There is some pushback at this point, but I do know that a number of states and places are opening their arms to the Afghanis who are coming into the United States. There's still a group of individuals who don't want to let anybody into the United States that are upset about this. And you can hear them in Congress and watch different groups play. But Buffalo actually is one of the largest refugee destinations in the United States. It's like the third largest city for refugees in the United States. And I know that we're looking right now to add in the next couple of weeks between 300 and 500 refugees from Afghanistan. So people are working to try to have that all set up so that they'll have a good situation. I would like to say one thing about trade, though, in the United States, which I think is a little bit different than Europe, is that I think the issue that many in the United States didn't quite understand was that while our models were showing that free trade was good and we were pushing for a free trade agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and in fact, I think that was a positive trade agreement. There are a couple of things that can be said. One, most of the barriers had been taken down before they signed the agreement. So when we finally look at the agreement, not much happens because we already had free trade before they actually signed these agreements. But the second thing that I think we missed was that the benefits and the costs of these trade agreements have very different impacts on different locations. So the free trade agreement in New York State was very, very positive, very, very well looked upon. But if we go down, for example, to some of the mid-Atlantic states, they lost in this deal. So we have certain states in the United States that are upset about this deal because they lost jobs, where New York maybe gained a lot more jobs than the mid-Atlantic states lost. And we never addressed that issue and said, well, how are we going to spread out the benefits from this free trade agreement? And what I think we're seeing in the United States now is because individuals didn't get any benefits from those agreements, they're not willing to support or trust a government to do another free trade agreement because they don't know anything other than this was bad for me. And I think that that's a critical issue that the United States has to think about in its trade policy, whether it's for, you know, certain corporations and industries or labor unions or, you know, other groups that are working on, social groups that are working on these issues.
So I have a question, Professors Leisyte and Floss. So you're both in higher education, and there is a certain perspective, a researcher perspective, and I'm curious as to where you see the role of this research perspective or research results in the greater policy area. How does higher education contribute to discussions of policy and policy direction? So what is the level of engagement? I mean, maybe you have some examples of your own research, or perhaps something you're more familiar with that's really taken off from higher education into policy level. I see Dr. Leisyte, you're nodding. Would you like to start?
Yeah, maybe I'll kick off here. When I think on European countries, it's also a very different story, you know, how science is respected in the society and by policy. And in Germany, overall, I would say academia is still quite well respected in the policy circles. And what we could have seen from the pandemic period, you know, the expert advice from academics has been really listened to, or at least debated on the media. You could always, you know, hear experts on the pandemics from a medical profession, as well as from economics, as well as from social sciences, sociology, political science. So you could really see a lot of input based on research results and informed policy research-informed policy making happening in the German context. If we look at the pandemic situation in the UK and how much policy was using research evidence and who were the advisors, how to deal with the pandemic, that's a very different story from Germany. So basically the experts that were advising the government in the UK, there were some of them that were really saying there is statistical evidence and modeling behind what they were doing. But actually it was really very different from the approach that was used in this country, in Germany. Another example that I could think of would be a small country, Lithuania, Eastern European country, where I come from. I've been following also I'm the chair of organization Futura Ciencia there. And I've seen what the advice has been taken on board or not, and what research has been done in terms of in life sciences, especially to deal with the pandemic. For example, what kind of testing of surfaces, how it can be used in practice. Also, what kind of effectiveness is there of vaccines or medication, which kind of pharmaceutical kind of research. That was really very much taken up and promoted at the policy level. And again, the evidence was taken on board. So I think it varies not only in terms of like Europe and the US, but it varies really about the overall culture of how much how seriously science is taken by society, and also what kind of governments are there, what kind of priorities are there, how much they really would think they would benefit from the knowledge.
Thank you. Science in the US. Science
Well,
in the US, Dr. Floss.
Science in the US. I think higher education in the United States is sort of at a crossroads for a couple of different reasons. First, over the next 5 years, it's estimated, looking at our high school population, that there are going to be about 5 million less students because of our low birth rates. And therefore, funding in higher education is really at a crossroads because we're just not going to have the students. So what we're seeing in very many states is the consolidation of colleges, the closing of colleges, and more importantly, the corporatization of colleges. So where it
could also attract foreign students.
And the pandemic has really put a kibosh onto that. And I think, quite frankly, because of the past president, a lot of foreign students who would have come to the United States aren't coming, quite frankly. So there has been this pressure to do that. The current president's wife works at a community college and has long been promoting community colleges at, I wouldn't say at the expense of other four-year institutions, but the emphasis is much more now on trade schools and community college education. And with the corporatization of our institutions, where many more college presidents are not coming up through the academic ranks, but in fact are coming from business, they're trying to run these like a business. So the question is, you're here to get a grant and you're going to have to fund not only yourself, but all the rest of the operation from the college. That's made colleges very different than where they were 20 or 25 years ago. I also think that there's somewhat of a disconnect because in a number of, shall I say, elite circles, the idea was that higher education was for the upper middle class. If you were going to go to a major research university or a well-respected four-year comprehensive college, that was going to be for, upper class families. That's not so much the case anymore, and it's now opened up much more to the whole population, and therefore I don't think in some policy circles we have the support in the United States that we used to have for higher ed as we go here. One last thing I will say is I think that there is a real misunderstanding in the corporatization, corporate culture, that somehow higher education can be fixed, I guess is the best word, by reducing labor and introducing capital into the market, thinking of it more as Microsoft, and all we need to do is get more computers and more software packages, and faculty really don't matter. The whole idea is faculty is the problem. And they cost too much, and therefore we're going to replace them with capital. I've done a number of papers on Bommel's disease, and I think that Bill Bommel started to talk about this problem before I was born in the 1950s, that he said that this was coming, and I think it's finally gotten here as we look at all of this, and it will probably go around the world as we start to see this, as corporations use this as a way that they think they can make profits off higher ed, and that we're no longer a public good.
So Dr. Floss, just to follow up on that, in the United States, corporate control of academia then would also imply extending the reach of policy control through academia. Am I understanding that correctly?
Right, and we've seen this blatantly at some universities, particularly at the University of Florida system, where the Kochs basically said, we'll give you $20 million, but this department has to be a conservative department that only hires people that I will tell you to hire. That's sort of a clumsy way to do it. I think that there are a lot of different issues. You know, to be totally honest, I was the statewide president of United University Professions, which is the 36,000 member union for all of SUNY faculty and staff. So I've dealt with a lot of these issues. We just had one come up where a Fulbright scholar from Europe was coming to college in New York, and one of the board members saw on a private Facebook page that this individual was pro-choice, and the board stepped in to say that they were going to rescind the offer. Not that she was going to talk about, you know, any pro-choice issues, but simply because she had expressed, you know, her free speech, you know, somewhere in the past, that they were trying to believe that they could have that kind of control. So I think that it's out there and it's growing. And I think we as faculty need to realize that we have to organize and fight back, because eventually they're going to say that tenure doesn't matter, right? That, and you can see this particularly in some of the smaller private institutions that I've been working with. What they're doing is calling tenure a one-year contract, that we can't fire you in the middle of the semester. That's what we mean tenure is at a number of these institutions. And I don't think anybody on this call would have thought that that's what we meant by tenure. So I'll leave it at that.
So the biggest threat for the general development of society is the political and the commercial influence in academia, but also in the whole society, as far as I can understand in this description, which is very depressing to hear. Do you see the same in Europe already, Professor Leisyte?
I think it really depends which country in Europe are we talking about.
If we're talking about Great Britain is obvious, yeah.
Yeah. So I would say when we talk about corporatization of universities, so UK is, you know, by far the most, so to say, neoliberalized, or with new public management reforms already in the 80s, Margaret Thatcher, and slashed, you know, budgets by nearly 1/3 at that time of universities, that there was a huge push for corporatization, and you can see the effects of that. Where there is the tenure is kind of there, but basically universities, if they wish, they can fire, they can close the departments. There is a lot of management control of academic work in the UK. If I'm thinking about, and what have we been studying, new public management reforms across different countries in continental European countries, for example, in Germany, when we think of tenure, you know, the professoriate is still, it's a public servant positions, so it's still very much public good higher education. I would say also funded by the public funding. Most of the university budgets are public. However, having said that, one cannot say that there is no corporatization trends also in German higher education. In different länder, in different states, it differs somewhat depending on the tradition and the government priorities. North Rhine-Westphalia, where Dortmund is known for more new public management orientation, so to say, in higher education policy. So here they were experimented with student fees, which is a huge thing for the German higher education, because higher education usually for students, there is a like really symbolic fee only, but it's more or less for free, so to say. And there is kind of a notion of university as a public good is still strong. At the same time, push for competition-oriented external funding, for example, in research, it has been really, really becoming stronger in the German universities. Also, initiatives like Excellence Initiative to really profile certain universities and pour more money into certain top performing universities, so stratify the system. That's another example of corporatization in the German context of higher education. Giving more powers to the management, to the rectorates, when it comes to, for example, appointment of staff, of professors. That is another area that is very much based on the performance agreements between the ministries in the states and the universities, as well as performance agreements with the professors. So the rectorate these days negotiates for 3 years the performance agreement with the professors, which was not the case 20 years ago. So you can see certain examples of this corporatization coming into academia also in Germany. At the same time, having said that, academic freedom is inscribed in the constitution of the country. So this kind of freedom of speech is really, really very strong in Germany and protected by law. And that, of course, gives a lot of space for academics. And when you think of unionism, you were mentioning unionism in the US. We can see in some countries, for example, in France, or we can see in the Netherlands, and especially these days in the UK, the effects of unionism. So UK has been protesting on the streets, especially this year, very strongly against the pension cuts. They kind of halved the pensions for all academia in the UK. And that is something that, asks for overt action and collective action from academia. So that I think there will be more of that coming up in the more neoliberalized higher education systems in Europe.
Can I maybe raise another topic? Because related to the point we have discussed, but I thought always there is a different attitude of the education in America and in Europe. While in Europe, we want to widen our horizon. In America, we want to start an entrepreneurship soon. So if the education is already directed to get students to start a business or to start an academic career or something, that's a difference. Like the young entrepreneur in America says, let's just try. If I fail, I start something new. And in Europe, we say, what kind of risk do I face when I start? Is that also a difference of attitude generally, of culture? We start maybe with Professor Floss.
I'm not so sure that we have that kind of entrepreneurial experience. I think I would tie it to the problem that our individuals have to pay to go to school. So they're paying large amounts of tuition. And what has happened, so in the 1970s, I think we were much more like Europe. There was a small fee that almost any family could afford to pay and send their child to school. And so there wasn't this pressure when you got out of school to have a job that was going to be able to pay your student debt back. But today, about 75% of even the public sector universities their budgets are paid for by tuition. So that means even the relatively cheap public education institutions, if you add room and board, are going to go for between $20,000 and $30,000 US a year. So you're going to come out with $80,000 to $100,000 worth of debt. And so if you're thinking about what kind of job am I going to need to get, it's got to be a job that's going to pay enough to allow me to live and to pay back this student loan. To the Biden administration's credit, they're trying to talk about free community college. The fundamental problem with that is it's not just tuition that is the issue, it's room and board, and that's where the big expenses are. I don't know about at your universities, but at my university, 97% of my students work more than 40 hours a week in part-time jobs just to try to survive, to be able to come to school. And they're still going to have this huge amount of student debt. So I wouldn't say they all want to become entrepreneurs and fail anymore. I think they're terrified of not being able to find a job that would pay enough to pay off their student loans and allow them to buy a house, to get married and have children. You're seeing a lot of social issues because of that, and a lot of questioning on whether college is worth it.
And in Europe?
Yeah, the mentality that you were mentioning, a lot of literature and practice examples shows that really indeed there is quite a different mentality when it comes to risk averseness. Let's say in Germany, among German students, one can really see that the key dream is to go graduate, get a secure job in a big company, then be able to take a mortgage, get a house, get family going, and so on. So this kind of traditional route of secure employment and not failing, right? So that's another big stigma of failure, right? And being bankrupt, for example, and what implications economically it has. Can you get other credits after that or not? Can you start another company after that or not? So this kind of business environment is kind of penalizing also the early starters in the European context, quite a few countries in Europe. So that is one aspect. The other aspect is that this is also so slowly changing because it depends on the generation, which student generation are we talking about. We did a small study recently in a couple of countries of kind of the motivation to be entrepreneurial and to engage and start your own businesses. And you can really see that there are very strict generational differences. The younger generation is much more open, especially in Scandinavia, to risk and to kind of go ahead and try out certain different areas and starting your own businesses. Another important factor that needs to be mentioned here is also the support, financial support, and various incentives that are put in place at universities, also in various lands in different states in Germany, to promote entrepreneurship in universities and student entrepreneurship. So, for example, at Dortmund University per year, there are around 30 companies created, quite a few by students. And they have business incubators, they have lots of financial also support, business plan writing support, and all kind of practical ways of nurturing those early companies. And that helps to overcome that mentality and kind of to try things out for younger generation. So I think one should also be careful saying it's not only in general the culture of the country, but it's also which generation are we actually talking about. And another important aspect here, maybe which is advantage also for European students, that they don't have those big loans and they don't have those big debts as the US students, right? So this urgency to have a job afterwards that is secure for life and so on is, I would argue, less than for the US student, right? So that is something that is definitely for sure different from the US.
Yeah,
one of the other interesting things that's happening after students get out of college is the number of jobs that they're now having, where before in the United States, individuals were much more like Europe. You would take a job and you were looking for stability and you were going to stay in a single company. Now, on average, our students, as we sort of look at them, are staying in a job 2 to 3 years, and instead of trying to move up in that company, they're moving to another company, and many of them will have 5 or 6 jobs over their lifetime. So in that sense, they're not risk averse, but what's happened is that means how you get your raise, how you get a higher income is not to move up within the company, but to move to different companies, which in some ways is good because it gives you this sort of cross-pollination from different companies. But in other ways, there's some difficulties because these companies now are not quite as stable. They don't have the historical context of what works or doesn't work. And people are always relearning the same lessons over and over again as we turn over whole sets of companies. So it'll be interesting to see if we move in a further direction away from what Europe has, or whether Europe comes closer to what we're doing.
We have about 3 minutes left. Enough time perhaps for an additional question or an additional comment, Gerald?
Now we can invite also our other participants if you have a question or a remark to do. I would come to an idea to show you with this thing. I don't know if you can see it. I can travel all over in Europe without any problem because it's a green pass, as we say, as we name it in Italy here where I live, and I pass through Austria to Germany, for and back, and without any problem. And so this makes sure that we come back to a kind of normality if everybody is 2 times vaccinated. And I got even the 3rd appointment in December, a booster vaccination in the age group over 60. They recommend it, and it's not a problem. So why don't we get it done also in the relations between United States and Dan? I would have loved to see Dan personally already, but I can't travel to America even with this green pass without going 2 weeks in isolation.
I'm coming to see you in next May, Gerald, so don't worry.
I hope so, yeah, sure. Yeah, you can travel already to Europe with a green pass, with a double vaccination, but we can't go to America, not yet.
And I have my New York State Empire Pass, which is exactly the same as yours. And the frustration with us is, even though we have it, trying to go 3 miles from where I'm sitting right now into Canada means I have to pay $100 for a test because we have corporatized our crossing the border here and doing it. So I have the same frustration as you have.
Yeah, but we have come to a solution now in Europe. Within Europe, it works, and I'm very glad we come back to normal. Meanwhile, even in North Rhine-Westphalia, the federal state where Dortmund is, since today, I think we have opened many bars and restaurants and disco dance clubs, etc., under the condition that the participants have this pass. That's the idea to overcome the pandemic worldwide, and also the economic, to come back to the principal question, the economic obstacles we had during the last time.
Yes, we had one quick question. If the stock market bubble burst in the US, as it did in 2008, what are the impacts globally likely to be? given the circumstances, current circumstances? Is that too complicated to get into?
No, I think that the stock market bubble itself isn't going to be as impactful, but it's the other things that go along with that stock market bubble. We talked about one of them, which is the real estate issues and those kinds of things. The other one would be if there's a serious issue on not getting infrastructure and things, that the US economy would start to slow down dramatically. But I think the speed with which the stock market has gone up over the last couple of years, I'm not so sure that people have had the ability to spend or think through that money. I would think that the real estate bubble that we're seeing is going to be much more impactful. And if that collapses, then I think together with the stock market, that could cause again a crisis sort of like 2008.
Lehman Brothers, we remember. Yes. Yeah, Dan, I think we have to thank now all the participants, in particular also our panelists, Professor Leisyte and Professor Floss, for a very interesting discussion, and maybe gives us a little bit of hope now for the future, that we have, that was my impression, similar opinions all over the Atlantic, and we have a similar analysis of the problems and the situation. Then you want to say something also for the next meeting we're facing?
Yes, this was the fourth in the Wunderbar Together series focusing on economics. Our last October Zoom meeting will be on American versus German stereotypes, typical stereotypes. And the plan is to invite former exchange student, Dortmund, Buffalo exchange student participants and their host families and their own families to discuss their impressions. Very informal.
Yeah, and we have to thank also the Wunderbar Together society group, which has contributed to make it possible, our conference, and say thank you to all of you, and hope some of you, we will see you again in 4 weeks from now, again on a Thursday. You know already the date, 20.
It's the 28th, Thursday the 28th.
Last Thursday in October. Okay, thank you all, and have a good time, and take care.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everybody.